Krista, do you want us to mute or you will do it?
Better mute. Better if you can do that.
Welcome to the third Greek Scientist Society Symposium. Leveraging the soft power of the global Hellenic community towards the Greek and Cypriot Next Generation Innovation Ecosystems 5.0.
Welcome back to our second session on bringing Greece and Cyprus to the forefront and the development of an ecosystem for the emerging space economy and the aerospace and defense sector. If you have any thought, comment, or question, you can share it again with us in the Q&A and comment section. Our speakers for this session are Professor Katja Sikara, who is Professor of Robotics and endowed Edward Frenkin Research Chair at School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University, Professor John Barras, Distinguished University Professor at the University of Maryland, Professor George Yanakis, Endowed Chair Professor in Wireless Telecommunications at the University of Minnesota, and Dr. Mikhail Tsetsanis, Member of Technical Staff at VSAT. The moderator of this session is Mrs. Kelly Keris-Ogborn. Mrs. Ogborn is the Vice President of Space, Commerce and Entrepreneurship of Space Foundation. Prior to joining Space Foundation, Keris-Ogborn was President and Chief Operating Officer of Advanced Rockets Corporation and President and Chief Executive Officer of HS Dracons. She holds an International Security and Conflict Resolution Bachelor's degree from San Diego State University, a Political Science Bachelor's degree from Stockholm University, and a Master's degree in Government and Security Studies from Johns Hopkins University. Mrs. Ogborn, we hand over to you so you can start the discussion.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all today on this Sunday, and especially for this panel discussion of bringing Greece and Cyprus to the forefront. Should we develop an ecosystem for emerging space economy and the aerospace and defense sector? Our goal for today is to start the dialogue on how to begin to develop an ecosystem within Greece and Cyprus that can address the growth challenges of the industries and meet the demands for future capabilities and market opportunities. And we will examine these topics under the lens of the part technology plays in furthering the goals of Greece and Cyprus, as well as the role academia, industry, and government can and should take. We have an hour together today, which can go really, really quickly. So our panel structure will begin with short presentations by each of our panelists, and then followed by a group discussion with some time for question and answer at the end. So if you have questions for our panelists as they're discussing their topics, please hold them until the question portion, or feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll make sure to monitor and then ask them later. Before we begin, I would like to introduce today's panelists in a little bit more depth, who I am thrilled to be joined by, and they are all acclaimed experts in their field, both in academia and the private sector. And I'm just going to give a quick synopsis of each of their backgrounds so we have sufficient time for presentations and discussion, but I encourage everyone to review their bios in full on the symposium page. So joining me today is Dr. Katja Sikara, who's a professor of robotics and computer science and the director of the Laboratory for Advanced Agents and Robotics Technology at Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Sikara is a sought-after speaker and has authored and co-authored more than 300 technical papers and led multi-million-dollar research efforts funded by DARPA, NASA, AFOSR, ONR, AFRL, NSF, and the private sector. Her research areas of interest and expertise include dealing with multi-agent systems, semantic web science, multi-agent learning in cooperative and adversarial environments, and case-based reasoning. And a few notable professional achievements include an appointment as an IEEE Fellow, a Fellow of the American Association for Artificial Intelligence, a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Greek National Center for Scientific Research, Demokritos, Information Technology Division, a recipient of the Outstanding Alumnus Award from the University of Wisconsin in 2005, and she serves as the U.S. co-chair for the U.S. European Semantic Web Services Initiative. Welcome, Dr. Sikara. Also joining us today is Dr. John Barras, who is a distinguished professor, Lockheed Martin Chair in Systems Engineering, and holds a permanent joint appointment with the Institute for Systems Research and Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Maryland. He is a recognized and awarded leader in economic development and innovation. And notable areas of his research interests include systems engineering, control and optimization, machine learning, artificial intelligence, communications networks, applied mathematics, signal processing, and robotics. And a few professional accolades include his appointments as an IEEE Fellow, a member of the National Academy of Inventors, and a member of the a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. Additionally, he was awarded in 2018 the AIAA Aerospace Communications Award and was inducted into the University of Maryland Clark School of Engineering Innovation Hall of Fame in 2016. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Barras. Also joining us today, hopefully if he gets his technology up and running, is Dr. Georgios Giannakis, who is an endowed chair professor in wireless telecommunications and the director of the Digital Technology Center at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Giannakis' areas of expertise include wireless communications and networking, statistical signal processing and sensor networks, as well as accompanying areas of interest are estimation of detection theory, time series analysis, and system identification. Some of his notable professional achievements include he's the recipient of the 2008 EuroSIP Technical Achievement Award. He's an IEEE Fellow in the year 2000 and had 6 journal publications receive Best Paper Awards from the IEEE Signal Processing and Communication Societies. And last but not least, we have Dr. Michael Titsanis, who is a member of the technical staff at Viasat Incorporated and an IEEE Fellow. He is an expert in wireless and satellite communications with deep roots in both academia and the private sector, to include Silicon Valley. Some notable professional achievements include recognition as an NSF Career Award, 2 IEEE Best Paper Awards, and having previously served as the chair of the IEEE Industrial Relations Committee and a member of the board of the IEEE Signaling Processing Society. So as you can see, our panelists definitely span a wide range of topics and technical background, and I think are more than up to the task to handle this discussion. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to our panelists to give their brief descriptions on their work oriented to the topic, and we will start with Dr. Sikara.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It is my honor and pleasure to be part of the significant symposium on Greek and Cypriot opportunities for entrepreneurship and science in space. Areas of applications in space include telecommunications, advances in satellites and space vehicles, construction, manufacturing, health, entrepreneurship, entertainment, tourism, and many others. This is a large variety of opportunities, and each country, because as we know, space belongs to everybody, each country has to see what their opportunities and core competencies are so that they can compete. So in this talk, I have concentrated on some examples that I think that Greece and Cyprus have core competence and opportunities thereof. And so these examples do not require heavy investments in hardware, but they are mostly software-based and IT-based, where brain power is required rather than heavy investment in infrastructure. An additional point in selecting these examples is that science already exists, and so that we have proof of concept in some sense, and also Greek scientists abroad are already involved in some of these areas. So also these technologies are aimed to be used in space, but are also significant for the Earth. I give examples from 3 areas: food production, environmental monitoring, healthcare. So first, in indoor agriculture, the world's population, as we know, is going to be about 2003 billion by the year 2050. So projections show that food production is totally inadequate to meet this demand. And additionally, of course, as we know, climate change is exacerbating this situation. So indoor food production techniques are being developed. Those will be needed for food production for space, where required there is no soil. It requires a limited amount of water and limited space. So of course, this is extremely significant for Earth as well. So indoor agriculture is based on plant science, environmental control, and data mining to improve yields. So small companies already have encouraging results. For example, a 2-acre indoor farm has same yield as a 720-acre farm. Extensions then, this is for leafy vegetables. So extensions to other crops that are just starting, for example, potatoes, are significant targets as well. So that's an opportunity here. Second, renting space in satellites rather than developing satellites, which is very expensive. And this would be for environmental monitoring, for example. So developing imaging technologies to be put on satellites that specialize for applications such as aquaculture or agriculture, and because they can produce accurate results with accurate frequency. Also, we can develop techniques for fusing satellite imagery with sense data from low-flying aircraft, and this is important for climate monitoring, disaster relief, of course, military applications, firefighting, and I'm also involved in some agricultural and these imaging technologies for wildfire suppression. Third, healthcare applications. So here, the whole point is to understand the changes in human health that are brought about by space travel and develop new therapies. One notable example is that astronauts has been observed that astronauts lose in a month bone mass equivalent to what a menopausal woman would lose in a year. And so they saw that the dietary regime and exercise regime was inadequate for that, and so new techniques needed to be developed. So of course, this is just an example. Other health effects, of course, are anticipated in new therapies and so on. So develop also specialized clothes to minimize work injuries. For one notable example is the RoboGlove technologies, because in space, because they are wearing pressurized gloves, they need to exert extra force that could bring injuries to muscles and tendons. And so, of course, this is, again, one example. Now we will get to the topic of how we can facilitate development of such industries after having given 3 illustrative examples. So methods to develop these ecosystems. Of course, in general, we need cooperation of academia, government, industry. And of course, this is obvious, but I want to give some concrete examples. Academic institution, for example, could make robust and continuing connections with industry. So universities, I don't think in Greece and Cyprus have those connections. In particular, they could develop technology transfer and strategy connections offices. The technology transfer offices would evaluate research for its patentability and transferability for industry. Help inventors with patents to navigate all these bureaucratic things and rules and regulations for patents, royalties, other useful contractual means. Strategic Connections offices facilitate joint academia industry workshops, industry visits to universities to act as conduits of information and relevant research. Student capstone projects and internships in national and international industries should be introduced as part of the curriculum. On the other hand, the government now can have programs for example, research calls explicitly addressing different research maturity levels, such as fundamental research, applied research, mature research, immediately deployable research, with different amounts and duration of funding. This program should indicate concrete topics and applications that are sought. Second suggestion is that government can have specific programs for small business innovative research, so-called SBIRs in the United States, again, for concrete topics, where small companies get awards for research and development, and where, as part of the evaluation, the candidates companies need to have credible technology transfer plans to industry for products based on the technology after the initial 3 to 4 years funding. Another idea is to have matching sites on the web that are sponsored by the government to bring together technology developments with technology productizers. So these are some ideas just to spark up the discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Dr. Satsanis.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to take the few minutes I have to try to provide a very high-level overview of the state of affairs in the satellite communications industry, where we are now, where we've been, how we came here in the last 10 years, and where it's going in the next 10 years, and then maybe have a couple of comments of where Greece fits into that. So we can say that today we have a pretty robust communications internet access network that covers large parts of the globe, and it serves millions of people, typically people that don't have access to fiber. That could be rural areas in developed countries or a developing world, or everything else, anything that moves. Like if you are an airliner, you take a flight and you connect on the Wi-Fi, that accesses the network through the satellite connectivity. Also defense applications, so on. So it's a very valuable part of the global communication infrastructure, and indispensable part of the infrastructure. But most people don't understand how recent this has been. Like if you go back 10, 15 years, communication satellite was just a TV broadcasting satellite. It has one giant beam, covered the whole United States or the whole of Europe, and was just broadcasting television signals. So there has been a relentless advance of various technologies that have come together to create this very sophisticated network we have today. So just to give you an idea of the sophistication, that we went from like a single beam, as I was talking about, to maybe tens of beams and hundreds of beams, and now we have satellites, thousands of beams. We're launching a satellite in my company later this year that has an insane number of beams. We have satellites have moved to very high frequencies where there's more bandwidth and more ability for more throughput. And those frequencies, we didn't even have electronics that worked in those frequencies. And so new semiconductor manufacturing processes and technologies have to be developed. So it's been a tremendous change. The current biggest change that's happening right now is that we're moving from a different paradigm from this into this low Earth orbit satellite network. So instead of having one high altitude satellite that covers a large portion of the globe, now you have these smaller satellites that just buzz around the Earth extremely fast, at many times faster than a bullet, and it just buzzes overhead. You can only see the satellite for a few minutes, so the network on the terminal on the ground has to hop continuously to different satellites to maintain connectivity to the network. So you need to have thousands or tens of thousands of these satellites all buzzing around, and creates a tremendously complex network. And as if that was not enough, people are looking into these 6G networks, that's further out, maybe 10 years out, where we're going to go into these extreme frequencies, what's called terahertz communications, for which actually currently we don't have electronics that work in this frequency, and we don't have a lot of other technologies and software and signal processing and so on that will need to be developed for that. So that's going to keep us busy. So that's what's happening. It's a very exciting journey, and it keeps going. And I think that it can serve a lot of underserved, and in the spirit of actually this digital inclusion, satellites have this social purpose as well, to bring everybody into the network. Now, where Greece fits into that. So there's different discussion whether we're talking about entrepreneurial activities or direct investment with large companies and so on. In both cases, there is some general things that apply everywhere, that you need to have strong research universities, you need to have educated workforce, you need to have property rights, efficient judicial system, all these things that are table stakes in order to participate in the global economy and in the high-tech economy. You have to have that. But particularly for satellites, I think there is a revolution right now with these LEO satellites. It's low Earth orbit satellites that's happening. And I think that Greece, as well as Europe, they have to be able to participate and create in international standards and create the appropriate framework so that this new real estate is equitably distributed amongst all countries, and is open, is based on open standards and based on open regulations and procedures that people can actually participate, and different companies and countries can be able to connect and provide their value to that network. So I think I'm out of time. We'll probably have some more time in the discussions session to expand more on these things. But thank you, Kelly, and don't want to take any more time.
Thank you. No, we appreciate providing that perspective on satellite communications, which is such an important backbone of both of these industries. Next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Giannakis.
Hi, Kelly. Can you hear me? Okay. I cannot hear you, but I guess.
Yes, we can hear you and see.
That's good. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much. So I want to talk a little bit about information technology ecosystem for Greece and Cyprus, and that around my recent interests, which is data sciences and network sciences. So the first question I want to ask would be what issues to address in information technology and what strengths to play on. And it has been already said that brains and Greek and Cypriot talents on research and innovation should be leveraged to the maximum, especially in data sciences and network sciences, as those relate to whatever we have abundant in Greece, right? Sun and water and wind and climate and tourism and agriculture and smart X. So why data science? Because, and big data, because, reflect on the fact that there are 15 billion cell phones and millions of base stations and 30 billion Facebook posts per month. So there is an undeniable growth in data, which is about 40% every year increase. But the investment on IT spending does not exceed 10%. And the projected IP traffic for 2022 is to exceed for 45 exabytes. An exabyte is 10 to the 18. So there is value added. People have figured that 300 billion will be gained, boost in US healthcare alone, which is twice the GDP of Greece. So data science and network science programs give ample opportunities for business, but also in education, we observe that there are programs and degrees all over, all throughout major universities in the world. So what is desired there? What is desired is leverage the brains on fundamental theory and algorithms and computing platforms to ensure secure, deep learning for artificial intelligence while accounting for the application domains that appear to be more fruitful for Greek and Cypriot ecosystems. So I pose the other question: how can we be contemporary, relevant, and adaptive to the IT thrusts? Clearly, contemporary, if we go after modern themes that obviously include AI that I mentioned, but also cybersecurity and quantum computing. That's the buzzword of the days. Those have to address, though, both regional challenges as well as societal needs and opportunities. Those include clearly marine technology, intelligent manufacturing of photovoltaics and wind turbines with satellite links that Dr. Tsatsanis pointed out, as well as smart grid and energy networks with renewables. And as far as society needs, those include obviously water and climate and personalized health informatics. And just to wrap up, the next question is, what are the major guidelines to give to universities for the next decade? That is the domain that I'm more familiar with. Already, Katja mentioned that there is a need to integrate education with research and innovation and technology transfer, right? So one thing to be stressed, and it has not been so in Greece, is what people call learn by experience projects from the industry. And there is a need to diversify curricula and have inter, cross, or transdisciplinary research pursuits that also instill entrepreneurship skills. And for example, in the US, it's very common to have offices of technology commercialization and incubator hubs next to universities, and something like that could be encouraged for Greek and Cypriot universities too. And the platforms should be welcoming such a transdisciplinary approach. Robotics is one, obviously, all electric transportation, autonomous vehicles, information and misinformation, which is common in recent days, as well as I said, cybersecurity and computing. And this wraps it up, Kelly, and I'll leave enough time for John to follow on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then our last presentation is going to be by Dr. Barras.
Hi, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to be as part of this meeting, as many others over the last 30 years on this topic. I want to take a first step back and try to define why aerospace and defense industry. So to me, both are challenging and often extreme environments. So as a result, history will show that they often push scientists and engineers to the frontiers of innovation in both science and technology. And in turn, these innovations often lead to dual-use products, meaning commercial and defense and others. So first, I will give you 4 technologies that I think currently are the most promising in this aerospace and defense sector. The first one already has been mentioned several times, and that's global broadband communications and data services everywhere, anytime, for all. And the for all is very important because you have to, if we're going to make it as a world and as a planet, to provide these communications to everybody, as the last 2 years showed. How now we do that? By integrating terrestrial wireline, terrestrial 5G and 6G, and beyond wireless and satellites, both GEO and LEO, that Dr. Tsatsanis mentioned. But now we have to have effective real-time management of communications and sensor networks via what is the current trend, which is virtualization. The entire network becomes a virtual through technologies such as software-defined networks and network function virtualization and dynamic resource allocation of bandwidth, delay, and topology. meaning in plain language, serve dynamically changing number of users with dynamically changing demand, with dynamically changing, perhaps sometimes ultra low latency and other applications. A major example of that is to support autonomous driving, for instance, or autonomous trucks. And then another trend that comes from defense and space is developing private 5G and 6G networks, meaning restricted networks that you have more control over them. And then develop interoperable virtual environments. There will be many virtual networks and they have to interoperate, like we had the problem in wireless several years ago. Second technology. Many of these products and systems in this sector, they are traditionally extremely complex, with many tectonic components and functions, heterogeneous, etc., etc. And that's why the so-called system science and engineering, which is flourishing again, actually started from aerospace and defense. And its aim is to conquer the complexity and develop methods, environments, and tools for as broad set as possible of engineers, scientists, and developers, meaning not just advanced theory and methods, but usable methods. And how do we do that? We have to develop integrated modeling tools. We have to develop interoperable system components from old to current. These have been stored in databases all over the world in different forms. We have to develop efficient methods for fast trade-off analysis and design space exploration, including things like material selection and geometry, and develop efficient methods and tools for verification, validation, and testing. And then we need to more recently integrate data-driven methods like machine learning and AI with these model-based techniques. And we have to address this for the whole product or system lifetime management, as we call it. Third technology is autonomy. It is hard to find any system or products in aerospace or defense that doesn't have something that is autonomous inside it, or the whole system is autonomous. And this now go to anywhere from autonomous cars to medicine and healthcare and so on and so forth. And we also go to develop this autonomous programmability or management of networks, which is called autonomous network and programmable things. And an important current trend in this area is trusted autonomy, means autonomy for which you can guarantee something about. And this means that we need to quantify autonomy and we need to provide methods to guarantee safety and assurance. And then you have further complications and challenges in trusted autonomy for human and robot collaboration. And last, in this sector, we have autonomous programmable networks, communication sensors, and others. And the last technology that again comes from this sector is security and trust. And how? We are working on blockchain and private blockchain technologies, private communication data networks that came from the military, allocate some security functionalities to hardware and the physical layer, and develop methods and products, and listen to this carefully, for a password-less world. Passwords is a major issue, and there are technologies that are coming up that they will allow us to live and work securely and trustworthy without passwords. And then we need to develop quantitative type methods for adaptive trust and privacy, and then we need to exploit the wireless medium for advanced security. So these four technologies, now I'm going to close with why they are relevant and what one can do for Greece with those, and several of these things have been mentioned. Of course, we need to emphasize these technologies for 5G, 6G satellites for communications and alleviate the digital divide. And as already mentioned, these technologies help in environmental monitoring, in agriculture, in manufacturing, and also in revolutionizing education. Second, use these technologies to strengthen the so-called heavy industries of Greece, which is tourism, agriculture, and merchant marine, in ways that have not been done so far, although some of these directions are quite obvious that what need to be done. Third, we use these technologies, and in addition, 3D printing, and this is very important, to do what we call democratized manufacturing, meaning bring manufacturing to any neighborhood and every area in the world. And that means going from things that are called today maker spaces to smart manufacturing, and especially distributed and geographically manufacturing. Fourth is use these technologies, the four I mentioned, for higher quality hands-on education that was mentioned already. And this has to happen not in universities alone, but like we do in Sweden and Germany, from elementary school to lifelong. In particular, we have to introduce computational thinking to kids from elementary school. And I want to give you as an example that the success of Sweden, many attribute to the fact that 20 years ago, Sweden gave free laptops to every child in science in elementary school. And last in this area is introduce all to metaverse culture, meaning have to live in what we call a networked immersed world. That's a technical term, which the popular term now has become metaverse. Fifth and last is, as already mentioned, the Professor Shifakis mentioned in the morning, we have to build effective total innovation systems. The total innovation system is a technical term, and universities in Sweden have it. We have it in Austria, we have it in Switzerland, we have it in the US, we don't have it in Greece. And in addition to linking university and research labs with industry and several of the other things I've already mentioned, we need to provide training for people to become entrepreneurs. You are not a born entrepreneur for the same reason you're not a born researcher. You have to be trained and train students, boot camps, and so on and so forth. And models of this type exist, and people to help Greece exist both in the US and Sweden. And I've offered this many times before. And the last one is you have to link internationally. In many of the areas we're talking about, especially in communications, you have to link internationally and even start binational collaboration programs as there exist for many countries already between US and Germany, US and Sweden, US and Israel, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for your presentations. I think you did a wonderful job of setting the stage on the dynamic or dynamism, I think is a proper word, of the space, aerospace, and defense sector, but also the myriad of technologies that really play into it. And so I want to dive into the discussion to pull the thread on a few of these. And as you all very clearly laid out, the sheer number of technological advancements and the pace of innovation really has increased the viability and economic capacity of the industries. And there are new entrepreneurs, new opportunities, and companies that really are changing the landscape and driving new innovations in new markets. And this creates a myriad of opportunity, but also challenge to create a framework to foster this sort of growth in a constructive manner. And so what this really requires is a creative thought process of looking at current needs and dissecting future trends. And I'm really glad that Dr. Barras and Dr. Sikara, you touched on this terrestrial application of space technologies, because I think that is a critical point, but also a lost point on a lot of people, to realize that a lot of the innovation and investment in these areas has very deep terrestrial applications that might not be based in the sector, but touch all areas of life, which I think is a really important point. So my first question, looking at these emerging technologies, and there are a lot to focus on, what do you think should be prioritized if you had to come up with a list or some sort of structure in terms of funding and resources to really help position Greece and Cyprus for growth? And Dr. Sikara, I'd like to start with you on this question and then pass it over to the other panelists if they have comments.
Yeah, so as I said, I think a lot of these technologies for environmental monitoring and food production, this is a big problem for everybody in the world. And so agriculture and aquaculture in particular, I think for Greece, aquaculture is very important. And this would really make it is an open area of these new technologies. Another thing, of course, is health. There are many different applications. I mentioned just two from that are inspired from space, but there are many different applications. And so these as application areas could be prioritized. And of course, what John also mentioned in terms of algorithms technology for basically for a trustworthy autonomy. So we are doing a little bit of work ourselves in AI in finding algorithms for basically trustworthy validation and verification of neural networks in AI, neural networks for vision and for other deep reinforcement learning technologies for sequential decision making and so on. And these are very challenging things. And of course, they require algorithmic and mathematical thought. And then they could be transferred with royalties and so on in terms of, to many different applications. And so that I think is something that's fitting.
Yep. John, go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to emphasize something, that if we're going to do anything with respect to industrial collaboration and so on and so forth, it has to be grassroots. And the area I will put the most emphasis right now for Greece will be agriculture, for two reasons. First of all, we all know there's a tremendous shortage of manpower for Greece, and this has been discussed in recent newspapers. Second is that agriculture is becoming totally automated, and that can help, both in terms of sensing what's going on in your fields by space and aircraft and others, like Katya mentioned, but also help you via machines and others to be more productive. And the third point I want to make, I'm encouraged to see almost 60,000 young people go away from Athens and start what is called boutique farms for special products, and this can be expanded. And it's a wonderful opportunity to distribute this technology innovation around the country and not keep everything in Athens. I was born in Athens. I'm not anti-Athens. I'm just trying to tell you that you have to distribute this technology around, and therefore create very good agriculture, which is distributed, and even, given the climate and everything else, have 2 cycles of production per year in Greece, which is possible. Okay?
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. I think that that was a very good laying the framework, because in particular, you have to start local with what areas are good at or known for, have the resources, and then expand upon that. And this sort of hits on this next topic of, you can have all the best brain trust and innovative minds, but you really have to then create a proactive culture to be able to create sustainability or have some sort of strategic framework for investment and resource allocation that can keep pace with the evolving landscape, but also ensures that the two nations are prepared to compete. And so my next question, and I'd like to start with you, Dr. Giannakis, is what are your suggestions for how we can go about creating some sort of proactive culture to ensure that there's a sustainability now and in the future? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Kelly, and everyone. Thinking about the keyword of what you asked is sustainability. And looking into a United Nations summit in 2005, the pillars of sustainable systems are 3. You must have environmental sustainability, you must have economic sustainability, and you must have social sustainability. And a beautiful example in my mind to demonstrate these 3 is provided by the sustainable infrastructure of power distribution networks. And the need for alternative forms of energy is evident with today's unfortunate war that we're witnessing in Ukraine. So what are my suggestions? We must integrate renewables, and we must integrate consumer driven usage, what people call demand response. And also all of this to be facilitated by an advanced metering infrastructure. Let me try to stress one by one. So if you, for environmental sustainability, we need to increase the integration of renewables. And what are renewables? Photovoltaics in Greece, micro wind farms, and plug-in electric vehicles, right? So by increasing integration of renewables, we minimize the footprint and do the best we can for the environment. And of course, renewables come with some uncertainty because they relate to weather prediction, for example. So we have to account for that as well. Now, so clearly, we need to worry about environmental sustainability. The second one is economic sustainability, and that will be achieved if we proactively embrace elastic loads, such as plug-in electric vehicles, and we provide financial incentives for demand response programs that attempt to balance supply and demand, and make sure that we make secure market decisions. So all of this, are basically will ensure economic sustainability. Last but not least is the social sustainability. We need to promote active consumer participation and invest on advanced metering technology. And at the same time, use, for example, AI to learn consumer preferences. And while we preserve privacy of everybody's data. So all in all, we want to ensure social acceptance at large. So when I talked about the infrastructure, the advanced metering infrastructure, I wanted to mention that 5 years ago, the Department of Energy put out a report to announce that about 70% of electricity is consumed by residential and commercial buildings. And 30% of that, a third of that, basically is wasted, either having lights on or non-adaptive thermostats, just to pick up simple things. So what are the suggestions on the research side? What advances can we envision in modeling, optimization, big data analytics, or learning and cybersecurity to enable sustainable power distribution networks? That's one question I'm posing. And what are the computational challenges that emerge with increased penetration of renewables, end user participation, and large-scale economic power markets? And I will close it at that point. So, as I said, this is my take on proactive suggestions to ensure sustainability in 3 directions.
That's great. Dr. Sikara.
Yes, so one other aspect of sustainability, one of these pillars, and maybe it's included in the social, I don't know, Professor Yanakis, but it is educational, of course, sustainability, right? We need to educate and keep our scientific personnel and in advance of what is happening elsewhere. So that is really a new, and Professor Barras said about the Swedish example, which I think is wonderful, the German example about really starting from kindergarten or grade school and so on. So I think this is very important because that is scientifically and technologically the pillar of sustainability for the rest of the decision making of what Professor Yanakis mentioned. Thank you.
Dr. Satsanis?
I have a short comment. I think that the educational aspect of it is not also for young kids, but I think that entrepreneurial activity is, as Professor Barra said, something that has to be taught. And there is a lot of examples. I'm more familiar with the US and things around here, universities in California and so on, where there are entrepreneurial courses, there is projects, there is incubators and other things that students get an exposure of what it is to take an innovation to market and what are all the other issues that are involved in that. So that's something that some emphasis could be placed on to better compete.
Absolutely. And that actually dovetails into this next topic that I wanted to touch on briefly. And Dr. Barras, this is back over to you because you touched on it so eloquently, but this concept of really making sure to utilize and tap into the existing brain trust. And you mentioned the startup ecosystem, but also maker spaces and other opportunities. So could you talk about that a bit more broadly in terms of how these can be better leveraged to create a robust ecosystem and for future growth?
Yes, thank you. I have been tremendously encouraged by finding in various parts of Greece grassroots efforts in this direction by maker spaces and others that they even led to startups. I would like to ask the government to support those in a non-intrusive way, quote unquote. Second, I want to mention is that if we go back to agriculture, and go back to the point that Professor Yanakis mentioned, we call in the US energy, water, and food a nexus, meaning they come together, and they are essential for sustainability. And one of the issues here is energy and renewables, which can start from local areas and acceptability by the users. And you can even have, in maker spaces to create sensors and other things and install them and try them. This was started in Thessaly several years ago by the local people and not necessarily by the federal government all the time or the central government in Greece. I would like to see more desalination plant efforts in the islands to solve the water problem. The technology exists. I do not know why the obstacles are there for not getting this broader. And lastly, in the food, as I already mentioned, and the last thing I want to mention is I would like us to use these technologies that come from this advanced defense and satellite sector to decentralize Greece, to create living like we have seen in Germany and Sweden and Austria, where people go away from the big cities and live in smaller distributed towns. I understand that this is going to take several decades, but we have to start. And that's going to help to create these local environments where people learn to become more sustainable in terms of energy and food and social culture and so on and so forth. I understand it's difficult, but we need to start it from birth to death in terms of education and culture.
Thank you. Moving quickly in the interest of time, we have a few more minutes left, and I have a broader question I want to posture to everyone, and then we'll hand it over for Q&A. But we do need to get on the topic of global collaboration, how Greece and Cyprus can leverage their network, but also work globally to advance these topics. And I want to start this question with Dr. Satsanis and then open it up to the group. But there's been a lot of things that have been touched upon in terms of technology transfer, patent assistance, matching funds, being more proactive in engaging this local ecosystem. But I'm curious what opportunities exist for broader collaboration that you can see. And Dr. Satsanis, I want to start with you primarily because your work in satellite communications, what's interesting about that topic is it's been postured that, data from satellites is going to be one of the most hotly traded commodities akin to oil in the years to come. And so there's a need for global collaboration because everyone has access to these satellites. And so I want to start with you on that topic, and then I'll open it up to the panel for other input.
Yes, so I think that you're right, and in the space of as I said, these revolutions that are happening in the satellite communication space, Greece has to definitely be aligned with Europe. Greece cannot do anything by itself in that space, so there needs to be. It can lead activities, but it has to be aligned with a general European effort. Greece has to be outward looking. All the institutions have to be outward looking and integrated in the European framework. I think the universities are very outward looking in Greece, but also the government and the private sector could do more. And I'm talking about standards, regulatory bodies, things that can create a framework that innovation can happen and the technologies and the companies can flourish. In particular, for these low Earth orbit satellites and this new revolution that's happening, Europe would not want in this revolution to have a couple of American companies dominate the space and get most of the real estate in low Earth orbit space, like has happened with previous revolutions in internet and social media and so on. And so this would need active engagement, I think, with international actors in the form of standards, open regulations, and property rights in space, and so things like an infrastructure that has to be created so that industry can flourish in smaller countries.
Have you seen that there has been an open dialogue between Greece and Europe, or just in general between other nations and data sharing?
I think, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Right to the point. Currently, there is a call for a huge European project to integrate satellites and terrestrial wireless and so on and so forth. We participate. I was trying to find participants in Greece. There are not many. So large EU projects are a great opportunity because many of them actually give the opportunity for industrial university collaboration. And that's going to be tremendous if it happens in Greece. Second, as I mentioned, is there are binational agreements. I'm currently working to bring a Fraunhofer in Greece and actually even get German funding for Greek students and exchange of students and so on and so forth. Somehow, we have to get Greece and Cyprus in these pairwise arrangements with all the goodies we described, meaning universities, industries, and local environments involved from the start. Because what I see in Greece, which is not what you need to do, is great universities and great research centers that they get this funding. But when I ask the question, what have you done for the nation and the society in that nation, I don't get an answer.
Interesting. Are there any other thoughts from any of the panelists?
Well, I think also a lot can be done with collaboration through our students, postdocs, and so on, with different exchanges, in other words, and continuing education in other countries. That already is happening, and encouragement via research institutes and research infrastructure in Greece for people to return, right, and or continue. So that is a very important thing, because then collaborations internationally are done through people sharing people.
I want to make a comment for the naysayers, because Professor Sifakis mentioned in the morning. There's a wonderful study for the Swedish Royal Academy of Engineering that describes 5 small countries and their economies, how they manage to do what we're talking about. So Greece can do it. There are countries with 10 million people, 3 million people that they were able to start from scratch and build the necessary infrastructure and build the environment to keep their people here without leaving and so on and so forth. So it can be done, but as Professor Sifakis mentioned in the morning, the various components have to come together in synchrony, and that's what's missing.
Yeah, I think we're going to get cut off in 1 minute. So Dr. Stetsanis, if you have a last minute.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say that the use cases that Greece is interested in, and Professor Barras talked about maritime and so on, that could also be something that has to be positioned for these international bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you all for sharing your input. We could probably talk for another 5 more hours on this, but I think we at least set the high-level strategic framework, and we'll probably have to have a part 2.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Sikara for pointing out the importance of the development of satellite technologies and facilities for uses in many aspects like agriculture, climate monitoring, and healthcare. And of course, the importance of academic research to achieve that. Professor Yanakis for his suggestions on the sustainability aspects and information on technology in Greece and Cyprus, and of course the involvement again of the Greek academia. I would like also to help Professor Barras for his comment on the available technologies and how they can facilitate innovation and education, and of course about how the sustainable A&D technologies can be used for decentralizing Greece. And last but not least, I would like to thank Dr. Tsetsanis for his comment on the entrepreneurial activities and industry investments on satellite communications, and of course how important it is for Greece to be involved in that, and of course his emphasis on the early stage education on that. Of course, Mrs. Ogborg, thank you very much. It was an excellent moderation and discussion. We'll have again a very short break before continuing with the third session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.